next keynote speaker, I've already introduced Carlos Silva, a born global company looking at new ways, innovative ways of funding startups, crowdfunding. You may have heard of the theme. Some VCs are worried about what's going to happen. Just as like Vital is challenging 3D printing and the way manufacturing will happen, Carlos is challenging the incumbents. So Carlos, tell us about SEEDRS and what you see. How do you see the future?
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to be here. It's a real pleasure. It's tough to follow 3D printing. 3D printing is pretty cool, and it's going to be really tough to follow that. But whenever I get asked to talk a little bit about my experience, one of the first things that comes to mind is to give some advice. I mean, by building SEEDRS, certainly I've learned something out of it, and I can share my experience with others. However, there's kind of a theme, that's kind of a recurring theme, like people giving advice. And lots of advice has been repeated over and over and over. And as has just been said, there are a million things that can kill your startup. I can list quite a number of, like problems among founders, lack of focus, poor execution, like the list goes on and on and on. But there's one that I think hasn't been talked about enough. So I'm going to focus on that one, and I'm going to tell the story of SEEDRS from that point of view. So this is kind of SEEDRS, a story of blind luck and serendipity. Luck has been hugely underrated. SEEDRS started with kind of me identifying a problem, which was, it was very hard and to raise capital. I mean, it's not that the capital isn't there, it's that the process itself hasn't really changed in quite some time, and it's a very inefficient process. It's usually connected to who you know, where you are, and whether you can kind of get that message across your own network. It's also slow, and people kind of keep reinventing the wheel. Like when you're at a seed stage level and you have to draft all the legal documents and all that, I mean, there's been a number of people kind of trying to standardize that, but still people kind of reinvent
Carlos, we're having trouble
over and over.
listening, so sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me better now? Awesome. So people keep reinventing how they do kind of the legal terms and all that. And I thought it can't be that hard. Like, surely there's a better way to do it. And that's when we started thinking about kind of how can we make the process of raising capital for a startup more efficient, and at the same time, by doing so, how can we open up this asset class to a wider audience? Because at the end of the day, the ability to invest in startups was reserved to those who could invest kind of tickets of at least 50,000 euros. And that's kind of, we're talking about 0.5% of the population. And even those, you need to have the time to actually talk with the companies, talk with the entrepreneurs, do the due diligence. It takes time. Not everyone can do that. So that was reserved to a very small percentage of the population. So we looked at it and thought, well, we can, I was kind of looking at crowdfunding platforms and all that. Why can't we do the same for equity? Shouldn't be that hard. Surely there are some issues to be solved, otherwise someone would have done it before. But I mean, I'm just finishing an MBA. My co-founder is an M&A lawyer. I've read through the rule book of financial services. I'm good to go. It won't be that hard. We've built a business plan and we've built financial projections. So we had everything covered. And we knew that we were going to start, and 1 year after that, we would be launching the platform, getting regulatory approval, and kind of conquer the world. And that was the plan. It didn't really turn out that way, funnily enough. It turns out that it took us 3 years since the moment that we started working on SEEDRS till the moment that we actually launched the platform. And that's a very long time for a startup. That's like ridiculously long time for a startup. And what I wanted to pass here in this kind of the start of the story is that the reason why we started SEEDRS was because we were absolutely ignorant. We had no idea about the challenges ahead. We kind of had a few things figured out. We know where we wanted to get to, but we really didn't have an idea of the obstacles that would lay ahead of us. Had we known that, we would probably have done something a lot easier. So we were very lucky about the fact that we had no financial services background and we had no idea what we were getting into. And that's how SEEDRS started, by pure ignorance. So after we decided to kind of make this a business, there was a problem of where do we get the money to actually get this off the ground. I mean, we were just finishing business school. I'd spent almost all of my money on the MBA. As you probably are aware, they're not cheap. And I didn't really have the money to kind of bootstrap the company. My co-founder didn't as well. We didn't have a rich uncle that could kind of fund us. So how could we raise the money? And that was kind of complete story of luck and serendipity, because when I moved to Oxford, I obviously rented a house to live at, and it was all taken care through the real estate agency. So I never actually met the landlord. And a few months after that, I got a letter from the landlord saying, well, I'm going to be in Oxford. I would love to stop by, get to know you, and see if everything was okay, just see if you had any questions about the apartment, anything at all. And in good MBA fashion, I just went to LinkedIn, did some research on who he was, and it turns out that he was an investor. He was a business angel investing in tech companies. So at that time, I had a few ideas for a few businesses, all of them pretty silly, but you kind of have to go through that process to understand that it's a silly idea. But I invited him over for tea. I talked to him about the ideas that I had. He told me they were silly, but still I didn't believe him at the time. But we kind of established a relationship, and we kept that relationship alive after that. So it turns out that when I finally had the idea for SEEDRS, it was one of the first persons that I talked to and kind of asked for money. And it was our first investor. He ended up being our first investor. So my landlord ended up being the first investor in SEEDRS. And what's hidden beneath this kind of initial story is something that I only learned about a year ago. So there we were, the two of us, super happy because finally someone got the idea. Someone believed in that idea enough to invest. We had finally managed to get that message through. Well, he told us, as I said, about a year ago, that actually he didn't believe in the idea, and he didn't thought we could pull it off. He thought that we would be unsuccessful. So why did he invest? Because by getting to know me and by getting to know my co-founder, he believed that we were a good team and that eventually we would do something pretty cool. And by being a first investor, he thought that that was kind of a small price to pay to be involved in whatever we decided to do next after we failed in this really stupid idea of starting SEEDRS. So that's how we got the first investment. And that was part of what got us going through the process of getting authorization and all that. Again, pure luck. I had no idea this was going on. We then got to a point where we were kind of running out of money. We didn't have the authorization yet. A number of people were telling us that there was no way in hell that the regulator would authorize something like SEEDRS. We had raised a few rounds of finance, but mostly small rounds. And as I said, we were kind of running out of money. And we thought, well, we're almost there. We just need a little bit more money, and no one was investing. I think people were getting fed up of the fact that we just kept kind of delaying launch because we couldn't get approval. And we, at that time, we were kind of trying to raise a 500K round, and that wasn't going very well. And at the same time, we applied to the Web Summit. At the time, the Web Summit was in London. So now everyone's about talking like the Web Summit in Lisbon. Before that was in Dublin, but kind of it actually started in London. So we applied to the Web Summit, to their kind of startup competition, and it turns out that by an alignment of planets, the week before the Web Summit happened, the FCA, which is the UK financial services regulator, gave us our authorization to operate. And because of that, we ended up winning the Web Summit. And because all of that, we got a lot of press. And because of all that press, all of a sudden, everyone wanted to invest. So in 24 hours, we closed a £1 million round. So that's double of what we were looking for. And we actually managed to kind of send an email to all the people that we were talking about, like, guys, you have to make your minds in 24 hours. Either you're in or you're out. And they were in. So we launched a month after that. We started operating. Initially, we were helping to finance rounds of below kind of £100,000, so pretty small rounds, very early stage, kind of idea stage rounds. We then kind of grown a little bit. We then went to £150,000 rounds, and now our kind of maximum cap, at least for now, is 5 million. So we've grown a little bit. As I said, we started in the UK initially, although from day one we had offices in London and in Lisbon. We still have kind of most of our business functions based in London, and then we have all of our engineering and design and product based here in Portugal, in Lisbon. We opened an office in Amsterdam, we opened an office in Berlin, we opened an office in New York, and we're now kind of entering the US. But along the way, and again going back to funding, along the way we were kind of slowly growing in the UK. We're kind of trying to make something happen, but we're still pretty niche. And although nowadays, if you go to the London ecosystem, kind of SEEDRS is a household name. It didn't used to be, of course. And we're kind of, again, needing more investment. And that's also an interesting story because we're trying to raise about £2 million at the time. And we were talking with different VCs. And the one that actually was kind of said we're going to invest earlier than all the others was a company that had a venture capital arm. And being kind of a corporate venture capital, the process from when they say, yeah, we love it, we're going to invest, to when they actually sign off on the process can be quite long. So we're kind of going up the ladder and talking with more people and more people. And we got to a point where we were kind of, we had kind of a month and a half of runway left. So we're kind of pretty close to running out of money. But they basically told us, okay, so we're done. All we need right now is the CEO to sign off on it. But this is kind of almost automatic, but he needs to sign off. That's all that we need. So after that, we're going to give you the money. You're going to be fine. You're going to be able to pay salaries. All good. So we're pretty happy at that time. It turns out that we didn't know that there were some political struggles within the company, and there were different points of view between the COO and the CEO, and the CEO refused to sign that. So all of a sudden, the whole round was just collapsed, and we were running out of money. We had a month and a half, and the company was about to die. So what did we do? We decided to raise that round through our own platform. We thought, well, we've built a platform to allow startups to raise capital. We have a number of investors on the platform. Surely someone will be interested in investing in us through the platform. Let's give it a try. We were kind of slightly conservative, so we decided, no, we're not going to try to raise 2 million. That's crazy. Let's try to raise 750K. I think that's feasible. We may be able to pull that within a month or so. So let's give it a try. So we put the campaign together. Hopefully by that time we had learned how to do a crowdfunding campaign. I mean, we were running a platform. We put a campaign together. We launched the campaign. at 9 o'clock on a Monday. By 10 o'clock, we had reached the target. By noon, we were at 1 million. 24 hours later, we were 2 million. We closed at 2.4 million pounds. So that went slightly better than we expected. And actually, it was the best thing that could have happened to us. Because looking back, I think we would have been in a much worse place had we accepted that VC as an investor. We now know that that would have been the wrong choice. And actually having our own users become our investors and having that kind of connection with them has been tremendously helpful. So in hindsight, it ended up being the best possible outcome. And I would love to say that it was because we planned it that way. And I would love to say that it was our foresight that took us there. But it really wasn't. We were kind of lucky. Within that kind of lack of luck of not being able to close the round, we're actually pretty lucky that things turned out that way. And from there, we continued to grow. As I said, we expanded to Europe. We're now operating at a European level. Up till now, we've helped fund over 400 companies with about 190 million being invested through the platform. And I think that it was a mix of all of these things kind of becoming aligned that allowed us to get to where we are. Just to give you some insight into where we are at the moment and some of the numbers, as I said, 400 companies being invested through the platform, over 190 million pounds invested as well. We have investors from 31 countries. And some of the sectors that have raised more rounds through us are kind of food and beverage, finance and payments, travel, leisure, and sports. But interestingly enough, more than the sectors is the fact that like about 11% of our deals come from food and beverage, about 10% come from finance and payments, about 10% as well come from leisure, sports, and travel. And the rest of the categories are like at 9%, 8%, 7%, which means that actually we get deals and businesses from all sorts of sectors, and there's no one dominant sector. And that's something that we didn't foresee. As you can probably understood by now, we're not very good at foreseeing stuff. We just kind of made it up and it kept going along. So we assumed that most of our businesses would be kind of tech, mobile, web, that kind of stuff. And actually, yes, we do have that. There's a lot of kind of web, tech, and mobile, but they're not dominant in any way. Actually, we do have lots of more traditional businesses. We do have lots of businesses that are non-digital. And we have everything from kind of very early stage startups all the way to companies that are kind of listed in the stock market. And I think that's a trend that we want to do more and more and more. I mean, we've had companies raise rounds of 50,000 pounds. We have companies now from multiple countries in Europe. We have companies from Portugal raising money through us, which is great. We have SEEDRS, which is a company that came out of VGA and MIT Portugal, and they've raised 200,000 pounds through us as well. And it's very exciting to see these businesses kind of get off the ground and grow and flourish because in a way we've kind of allowed them to tap into something that was previously untapped. And I think that, as I was saying, like we have companies from at different stages. The largest round till about a month was a company called Chapel Down, which is actually the largest wine producer in the UK. Again, not a tech business, not mobile, not web, just a winemaker. And they raised about 3 million euros through us. About 4 million pounds through us. And the reason why they did that, so they're a listed company. And the reason why they did that was because, not because they needed the money. Well, they needed the money, obviously, that's why they raised the money. But they could have raised that through the stock market. I mean, there was liquidity there. They could have easily done that. The reason why they raised through us was because they wanted more than just the money. They wanted to connect with their clients. They wanted to connect with their consumers. They wanted to create a strong bond between those who love the brand and were consuming their products and their investors, their investor base. They wanted to be able to invite them to the wineries. They wanted to be able to promote new wines to them, and they wanted to foster that relationship. And that's a big part of why companies raise money through equity crowdfunding. It's not just because of the money. In the same way that you don't raise money from a good business angel or a good VC just because of the money, it's also because you want more than that. You want the network, you want the advice, you want the help in raising the next round. The same applies to equity crowdfunding. It's not just about the money. It's what you can get on top of it. It's the connection to your user base. It's the ability to promote your product through PR and through a huge fan base that are gonna stick with you no matter what because they've invested in you. It's a way to also validate your product and your service. And I think that's kind of the story. I think that we're now at a point where we're financing kind of larger and larger rounds. The reason why we're sticking to 5 million is because more than that you need to actually issue a financial prospectus, and that's slightly more complicated. But the big vision is we wanted to create a platform that allowed anyone in the world to invest in companies anywhere else in the world, because there's money everywhere and there's talent everywhere, and we wanted to be able to connect these two regardless of where they are in the world, and we wanted to make that process as seamless and as efficient as possible. And we started with UK, we're now in Europe, soon we'll be the first pan-European equity crowdfunding platform, and we expect to be a global company sometime in the future as well. So sorry if I was boring, I hope I wasn't. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
Thank you. I have a question that's related to crowdfunding, and I work with lots of companies, and most of them are quite techy companies where the crowdfunding may not be the route because it takes an understanding of who's going to invest. And you also mentioned that most of your deal flow or the ones that you help is food or sports equipment that is easy to understand for anyone. How would you see crowdfunding as a source of capital for those that are, I would say, slightly more complicated technologies than agri-tech or food tech or things like that?
So that's actually a very good question, and I've gotten that question a number of times before. There are certain kinds of businesses that are not suitable for equity crowdfunding, either because they're too capital intensive or because they are indeed too technical and too complicated. Having said that, my experience is that 90% of the businesses that are supposedly too tech to be funded through equity crowdfunding, actually their founders are trying to sell the wrong thing. Because at the end of the day, what you're selling is not necessarily the technology, it's the experience and it's the value. And that should be easy to explain. If you're not able to explain that, there are of course exceptions, like if you're developing a new drug, that's very specific. But in most cases, what you have to be able to explain in a very simple way is what kind of value do you add to people's lives or to businesses. And the underlying technology is just a means to provide that value. And you may have to be able to explain that to an investor who's investing 100K or $1 million. But for that, you can also kind of communicate directly with those investors through the platform and go a little bit more in depth. But for an investor who's willing to invest like 500 or 1,000 and want to diversify into 30 or 40 or 50 companies, that doesn't really matter. All they need to is to believe in the team and to see the value of what that team is creating. And that should be simple to explain.
I've got a question, Carlos. which is inevitable, not an easy one. Brexit.
I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, okay.
No. That's a very good question. Actually, I was in Berlin to talk in a panel on the day right after Brexit, and I knew when I woke up and I read the newspaper, like, damn, I'm gonna have to answer this. So, yeah, Brexit. It's really silly what happened. I don't think anyone expected that. I don't think the Brexit supporters expected that. It's obviously bad for everyone, for the UK, for Europe, for the world as a whole, because it kind of reflects a trend that is quite dangerous in my perspective. In terms of SEEDRS, there are certain effects. I mean, we saw kind of a slight dip in terms of investment right after Brexit, because a lot of our investors are executives in the city, and all of a sudden they were worried about their future. But having said that, I mean, October has been an amazing month for us, so that has kind of bounced back. I think that the main effect of it right now is uncertainty and volatility. As for the future, it's anyone's guess. No one really knows what's going to happen. But what we do know is that we built SEEDRS to be a cross-border platform. And it's a lot easier for us to be regulated in the UK and be able to operate in Europe. But we actually had to get regulated in the US, and we're going to have to get regulated in other countries as well. So from our perspective, this is just another border that we have to cross, and we're already working on eventually being regulated outside of the UK in continental Europe.
Just
so
speed up the process.
we're speeding up the process. It's annoying, but it's not critical for us.
I have one question, which is, thank you first of all for the presentation, which is, as I understand, you guys represent investors in the board. Is it correct or
No.
not? Yes or no?
No.
No.
But you can continue the question,
Yeah,
and then I'll
so when
explain
you
it.
have, imagine, 200 investors on one company, and they raised, and they, I don't know, they acquired 20% of the company or something like that. So how then do you manage all, after that, the investment in the company? That's number one. Number two, if things go wrong, how can you explain that to all the investors, and what's the liabilities of all of those things?
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a very good question. So in terms of your first question, do we see it on the board? No. And the reason why we don't is because kind of that's what VCs and angels end up doing. They see it on the board. But that's a business that is very, very difficult to scale. There's only so many boards that you can see that. And you have to dedicate time, and you have to dedicate a lot to that process. And we're a scale business, so that doesn't work for us. We're not here to kind of replace angels and VCs. We're here to complement them. So most of our best companies kind of raise money at the same time through SEEDRS and through VCs and through eventually angels, and eventually it's the VC that sits on the board, and we don't. Having said that, in terms of managing like hundreds of investors, so in the round where we raised 2.4 million pounds, we got over 900 investors. That's a lot. And managing that directly as an entrepreneur is a headache. However, what we do is we act as nominees for all those investors. So we're kind of legal representatives of those investors. We group them together, and we're kind of the legal investor in that company. So we're the ones kind of doing all the legal due diligence, executing the deal, kind of communicating with the entrepreneur and all that. We take care of that. And we've built our own software to be able to manage that in a seamless way. The entrepreneur can still and should talk with his investors, with the underlying investors, and the investors still talk with the entrepreneur. They can do that through the platform, or they can do that directly. But in the back end, we're taking care of all the paperwork, and we stay with the business all the way to an exit.
So you follow the business, that's what
We follow the business, but we don't
so
sit on the
you are
board.
following 400 businesses or something?
Yeah. Yeah, but
Imagine that you scale to 1 million,
we're way more light touch than a VC. So as I said, we don't do that kind of deal. What we do is we have to be able to get information from the businesses, and that's kind of something that they push to us, and distribute that to the investors, and also act in certain situations. So whenever if the business is winding down, we have to do something. If the business is selling, we have to do something. But that doesn't scale linearly. So we have to increase our team, but there's not a direct linear correlation with the number of businesses. Okay.
Thank you.
Just one question. Thank you for the presentation. Have you ever thought seriously about giving up? And is there something you really think you should have done completely different?
That's a very good question. The second one is actually a lot easier to answer. Is there something that I should have done differently? Yeah, tons of stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. Like if I were to start a business now, I would do like 70% of things differently. I mean, what's the point of actually kind of going through that process if you're not learning about it? So I feel like I'm a much, much better entrepreneur now than I was when I started. So a million mistakes that we've made. What was the...
The question was whether you ever seriously thought about
giving up. Yeah, I mean, you go through that, and that's one of the things that entrepreneurs never talk about, because like we're always in pitch mode, selling mode, where it's like everything is awesome, we're gonna make it, and all that. But you go through that. It's a roller coaster, and that's why I think it's so important to pick the right co-founder, because the co-founder is the only person that you can actually talk openly about those things. So it's really important to have a co-founder that is able to back you up and lift you up when you're down, and that you can do the other way around as well. And the other thing is, if you're doing a startup for the money, don't do it. Just do something else. Because statistically speaking, starting a company because you want to get rich is a really, really stupid idea. There are much better ways, much safer ways to make money. If you think that 1 out of 8 companies is successful, it works to diversify for a VC, but as an entrepreneur, and you can only build so many companies within your lifespan, it's a really, really, really bad call. So yeah, money is important, but at the end of the day, you have to be doing that for something else, because you're passionate, because you love what you're doing, because you have a vision, because you want to make something and you want to leave something for your kids or for future generations. If it's just about the money, you're going to give up.
Thank you.
Welcome.